Ryan Reynolds here for, I guess, my 100th Mint commercial. No, don't. No. I mean, honestly, when I started this, I thought I only have to do like 4 of these. I mean, it's unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month. How are there still people paying 2 or 3 times that much? I'm sorry, I shouldn't be victim blaming here. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/save. Whenever you're ready.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
This episode is brought to you by Experian. Are you paying for subscriptions you don't use, but can't find the time or energy to cancel them? Experian could cancel unwanted subscriptions for you, saving you an average of $270 per year. And plenty of time. Download the Experian app. Results will vary. Not all subscriptions are eligible. Savings are not guaranteed. Paid membership with connected payment account required.
Welcome to the Casting Across Fly Fishing Podcast. I'm Matthew of castingacross.com, where I explore the quarry and culture of fly fishing. Well, today I'm not going to talk about the quarry or the culture of fly fishing because I'm going to be talking about traditional fishing gear, and by that I mean spinning, casting, bait casting, and how it's okay. So before you turn off, flip to something much more fly fishing-y, hear me out. This is really important because, first of all, we ought not to be so elitist and so insulated that we totally shut off the possibility of using a spinning rod. Because, and I'll talk about a few of those reasons here in a moment, but first of all, because it's just poor taste. There is nothing wrong with using light tackle. There's nothing wrong with using heavy tackle. There's nothing wrong with using a incredibly stiff casting rod and 40-pound braided line and a precision engineered spinning or casting reel and jerking bass off of really deep holes and weighing them and being in tournaments. There's nothing wrong with that. Certainly there are people that do those things that probably do it in the wrong way for the wrong reasons, might not be the most ethical anglers, but as a whole, as a kind of a neutral entity, that kind of fishing is totally fine. It's what you do with it that is problematic. So just kind of first and foremost, there's nothing wrong with using a spinning rod. There's nothing wrong with using a treble hook. There's nothing wrong with using an awesome devil's horse with 3 treble hooks on it, as long as you're fishing the right way. And really, at the end of the day, it comes down to how you treat the resource, not how you are treating the resource or how you're interacting with the resource. If you can use a fly rod, you can use a fly rod in a very, I would say cruel manner, and you can use a spinning or a casting rod in a very eco-friendly and environmentally conscious manner. It all depends on the wielder of the item. There are no, with the exception of maybe snagging hooks, and even then you could probably make an argument for a snagging hook being effective for maybe non-native or invasive species or something like that. But you know, fishing gear is morally neutral, with the exception of the Banjo Minnow, which is morally positive, but we might talk about that later. So why if you fly fish should you not only be not against spinning gear and conventional gear, but why should you kind of keep it in the periphery of your options? Well, first and foremost, I think that's important because a lot of us came from that world. There are some folks, probably a good number of people, I'm not sure what the percentages would be, who started off fishing by fly fishing. But the majority story that I've heard from my circle of friends and from folks I know just in social media and other things, they started using conventional tackle and they switched to fly fishing. So you shouldn't get rid of your stuff once you start fly fishing. You shouldn't say, I've got $1,000 worth of conventional gear. I'm going to sell that for pennies on the dollar so I can get my first fly outfit. Hang on to it. There's value in it. Moreover, there's value in those experiences, and you want that flexibility. Fly fishing should be seen as one tool, maybe your preferred tool, maybe what you seriously believe is the most effective and efficient tool in your arsenal, but fly fishing should be only one tool in your arsenal for catching fish. I mean, if you want to catch catfish, fly fishing works. I've caught catfish on the fly, but it is not the best way to catch big catfish, and you can't delude yourself and say that it is. But we're not going to be talking about catfish today, although catfish would be a good subject, perhaps for another podcast on a later day. But I'm going to talk about three circumstances why conventional gear might be better, and also a couple of things that you can improve your fly fishing with through using conventional gear, tackle, and methods. So first of all, why I use usually spinning gear. I can do bait casting, and I have some bait casting rigs, but more often than not, I'm using spinning gear just because of the type of fishing I do. So that's kind of for the frame of reference, spinning gear, and then spin casting when my kids are involved. First of all, is convenience, and sometimes I need this. If I'm only going out for the day, I always have a spinning combo in the car if I'm going to a lake or a pond, in case the weather is gnarly. I feel like even on the biggest of rivers, just the way the lay of the land is, I can make do with fly fishing. But if I'm out on open water and there's weather, I want an alternative so I don't have to just kind of give up. I can cast heavier lines and stiffer rods into a wind. It just gets to be miserable. So when the weather is not great, whether it be precipitation that is heavy or wind that is heavy, having conventional gear on standby is a way to kind of salvage a trip. And you're able to fish, not just engage in the act of fly fishing. You're able to actually fish when you have that conventional gear that's there. So that's the first thing. The second thing kind of ties into the first, which is ponds. If I'm the first thing with the weather is if you're on open water, if you're out in a boat. But if you're walking the perimeter of a pond, there's a lot of places, especially where I am in New England, where it's just not feasible to cast from the bank. So I'm not sure if you've seen pictures of New England, and if you have, they're probably these idyllic images of old church spires and quaint little villages with ponds and rivers running through them. Well, those pictures are a lot like a realtor that gets really sneaky with the pictures they take, and they take the great backyard view, but they leave the toilet seat planter that's just in the periphery out of the image, and the creepy old tree with the like the skeleton hanging out of it that's been there since last Halloween out of the picture, because New England is mostly swamp. I love it up here, but it's mostly swamp, and it is not conducive to fly fishing on foot in most circumstances, especially for warm water species or around and ponds. So in those circumstances, casting gear or spinning gear, it really excels. And you can probably find analogs to my situation anywhere in the world, especially anywhere in the United States. So those are reasons where, for convenience sake, having a ultralight spinning combo in the car as a backup is not the worst thing in the world. Secondly, kayaks. So I don't fish out of boats a lot. I don't fish out of drift boats, I don't fish out of skiffs, and I certainly don't fish out of kayaks a lot. But I do fish out of kayaks a handful of times in the warm weather months. Again, living in New England, the warm weather months are really that most tight use of that plural. It's only a few months. But I do get in a kayak, and I honestly don't do it enough to be comfortable in fly casting and feel like I'm getting the kind of accuracy and distance and presentation and really even just the act of fishing and retrieving with fly line out of a kayak that I think is as good as it should be. I just don't do it enough. But when I'm using spinning gear, I really do feel like I'm fishing well, and I'm fishing to the kind of caliber that I want to. Now, this could change. If I were to get a nicer kayak and I were to spend more time on the water, I probably would develop those fly fishing skills. But if you're only hopping out on a john boat or a rowboat or a kayak or a canoe every once in a while, then fly fishing, just the motion that's involved, especially in a boat that doesn't take much water, so you're sitting up pretty high, you can actually pivot yourself pretty easily, especially if you don't weigh a lot. That was my experience with the very first watercraft I owned, which was a pontoon boat. So dual pontoons with a seat that was in between them. And this was when I was in college, and so I'm still not very large. I wasn't very large then at all either. And I would pump these things up to full capacity of air, sit in the seat, go out either in moving water or in still water and casting, especially a heavier rod where I kind of had to put my hips into it and get the thing moving, I would spin like a top on the water. And it never occurred to me to let some of the air out of the pontoons, but this is just one example where, I didn't do it enough to get familiar with it and get comfortable with it, and so it was just frustrating. So if you're only going out on a canoe for a few days out throughout the year, then definitely take your spinning gear out. Unless you really want to buckle down and learn how to fly fish out of a canoe or a kayak, it might just be easier to take out that spinning gear. That's just my experience, but I think that's one situation where having that conventional gear could be more beneficial. If you're not comfortable rowing, paddling, whatever you want to say, then that's another reason why, just flicking your wrist and zipping that lure out 50 feet is one less thing to worry about than not only casting but line management around your knees, around your feet when you have oars and other gear that you're not used to. So not saying it's impossible. Certainly people do it and do it very, very well and love it. But if you're not going to be doing it a lot, that's one thing to think about. The third situation, and this is the one that I was engaged in earlier today before recording this podcast, is when I take my kids out. So first is convenience, second is if you're out on a boat, and thirdly is with your kids. My kids fly fish. At the time of this recording, I have a 7-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a little tiny baby. The baby and the 2-year-old aren't casting fly rods yet, but the 7-year-old and the 4-year-old do it, and they do it well. But there is a lot of hands-on time, especially with the 4-year-old when it comes to fly casting. And that's not to say that they can't do it. They just don't have the kind of independence yet where if I have me and both boys out, that they're able to both fish kind of at the same time independently, which they really enjoy. I don't get a lot of fishing in when I'm with my kids, but I understand that. And there's a lot of fun and a lot of enrichment and enjoyment and good things that happen with just watching them fish, helping them fish, enjoying nature. But that's kind of aside the point. But when I'm with them, and I do bring a rod, I usually don't bring my fly rod. They're both using spin casting gear, Zebco, 33s, and ugly sticks, and it's a lot of help them cast, then make one cast for myself. And sometimes that's just to say, oh, this lure is working, you guys need to switch to a spinner, you need to switch to a grub, you need to switch to a jig, you need to switch to a hula popper, or whatever I happen to be using. But to be able to get one cast in real quick, and even just kind of get that little, I feel like I went fishing fix in while they're fishing, while I'm helping them fish, it really does kind of help me persevere until the next time I get out for myself. So when I'm fishing with my kids, it allows me to carry only one set of gear, one tackle box, and be able to get a quick cast in. Similarly, if one of their rigs gets completely jacked up beyond recognition because they somehow are trying to cast and untangle a line and watch a butterfly and sprint and climb a tree at the same time, which is a very conservative estimation of, I think, what they are trying to do while fishing sometimes, I can say, all right, you use my rod while I undo yours. And again, this is kind of like a combo situation because when we're fishing near home, usually they're at a pond. And again, in New England, it's not like there's tons of open space. They're usually kind of crammed in a 10-yard spot in between trees, and they're casting virtually shoulder to shoulder with one another. So fly casting with that kind of proximity with each other isn't super comfortable, at least with the 7-year-old and the 4-year-old. So having conventional gear on hand and available, and more than just kind of one break glass in case of emergency outfit, is helpful if you're taking kids fishing. There's nothing wrong with taking kids fly fishing. My kids do it, but when we're all doing it together and we're just getting out for a few minutes, then we bring out the conventional gear. So those are 3 circumstances. Circumstances where convenience kind of necessitates dialing back from fly gear to conventional gear. Secondly, if you're on a watercraft and you're not comfortable with it. And thirdly, if you're using your time to take your kids out, or you could probably even say someone or someones who are very inexperienced with fly casting, and you just want to fish. You just want to catch a couple of bluegill or pickerel or something like that. Now, real quick, in the few minutes that we have left before I wrap it up, I want to talk about some kind of things that you can take from your conventional fishing time that will translate into your fly fishing. The first one, and I mentioned chain pickerel here a minute ago, and they've taught me something using conventional gear that I've really been able to translate into my fly fishing, and that is the speed at which aggressive predatory fish want your retrieves to be. So you think about, you cast out with a topwater fly or a streamer that doesn't have a lot of weight on it, and you retrieve it quickly with a standard one-hand retrieve. You think, you have that, your right hand, if you're a right-handed caster, pinched around that line up against the cork. Your left hand is stripping that in as quickly as you can. You can get that fly moving pretty quickly, but that is nothing compared to how quickly you can retrieve a jerkbait or a spinnerbait or a buzzbait with a spinning reel, especially one with a good gear ratio, or a casting reel with a good gear ratio. And I have found, especially in New England, fishing with toothy critters, so pickerel and pike, that an incredibly fast retrieve is often, in the summer and fall months, what is going to trigger the most responses. So as I fly fish for those species, what have I been able to do? Not do the single hand retrieve, but do the whole bluefish striper thing where I throw that rod up under my armpit and I'm retrieving with two hands. And I found that my fly fishing for those toothy predatory species, and even species like smallmouth bass and some other critters, has really improved because I've been able to think and notice that a faster retrieve works. And that's something I might have heard, but until I actually saw the speed of my buzzbait with my conventional gear moving across the water as fast as it was, eliciting the kind of strikes that it did, I didn't realize that I was going to have to change the way I retrieve my fly line and my fly to get that same sort of response from that method of fishing. So that's one thing. Secondly is depth. It is a lot easier to get a lure with a 1/8 ounce, 1/4 ounce weight on it to depth than it is to wait for a fly, even a heavy fly on a sinking fly line. There's just so much more resistance, and casting flies with that sort of weight on them is just, gets ridiculous, and you really have to ramp up your rod weight to accomplish that. But using conventional gear and those heavier lures, it really makes you appreciate that if you do want to fly fish and try to get down to depth, either in a deeper river or in a still water, you are going to have to alter your gear by adding either that density compensated line, the sink tip fly line, the poly leader, those leaders that you attach at the end of your fly line between that and the leader. That is essentially a quick sink tip. Adding more weight to your flies if you tie, putting not only a bead head, cone head, but also some weighted wraps on those to get those flies down. That's actually changed my fly tying, and it makes me stop and think, all right, I am going to have to do both the weighted head and the weighted body on this fly so that it gets down, because I remember back to thinking with conventional lures, when I hit some of these lakes and some of these ponds up here and some where I'm out on a kayak and I'm casting out and waiting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 beats, and that thing's sinking like a rock, that to get that same sort of effect with a fly, if I want to target those same fish, I'm really going to have to change my gear. So that's the second one. The third thing, and this is incredibly important, so pay attention to this, the Banjo Minnow. I mentioned it earlier, coming back to it. I don't care how hokey you think it is, fishing the Banjo Minnow has made me a better streamer fisherman. Now, I'm not going to give away all of my juicy tidbits of how that is and why that is in the podcast, because we're getting near to my 20-minute mark. But I'm going to put an article in the show notes of this podcast on castingacross.com where you can go in and read why a Banjo Minnow made me a better fly fisherman. And it's not a joke. I mean, it's funny. I mean, they're Banjo Minnows, for goodness sake. But legitimately, fishing Banjo Minnows with conventional spinning gear made me a better fly fisherman, especially using streamers on spring creeks for very, very finicky trout. So hopefully that's helpful. Hopefully that has maybe sanded the rough edge of your fly fishing elitism. If you have it, if you were able to last 19 minutes into this podcast. But don't be afraid of it. It's wonderful. It's great to be able to have a diverse range of options of fishing available and at your disposal, not just for yourself, but as I said before, if you have other people involved, especially your own children. Fly fishing is great. Fly fishing is wonderful. I do it with my kids, but there's times when just chucking out a spinner or even a bobber with some bait on it is the way to go. And you might have somebody in life that can benefit from that. But your fly fishing will benefit from thinking back to or even reintroducing conventional gear into your fishing world. Now to talk about a couple of the articles that appeared on castingacross.com this week. This Monday, I actually introduced a new page on castingacross.com, and it is small stream fly rods. So one of the articles that has been incredibly popular for a few years now is a rod article I wrote called The Perfect Small Stream Fly Rod. There's a question mark at the end. And folks clicked on those links and they have read it, and every day a handful of people are reading that article, finding it through various other websites and links that exist out on the interwebs. So what I've done is I've consolidated some of my reviews and talked about 4 fly rods that I really like for small stream fly fishing. So these are mountain brooks and spring creeks. So definitely check that page out. Secondly, I wrote an article called Shiny Happy Fly People, and it's basically about chilling out, live and let live. Don't get so bent out of shape about how and why other people fish would be a really appropriate thing for what we talked about today, but more to the point, how people fly fish and what people do, and just to be really, take a step back. We're fishing, we're having fun. You fight the battles you need to fight, and you let the other stuff go, and just realize we're out here trying to enjoy the resource, protect the resource, catch fish, and have a good time. This week's recommendation is the Careless Ethiopians YouTube channel. So I always feel a little bit silly when I recommend somebody who has a lot of subscribers and a lot of views already. It's like when I recommend an Orvis video that 10,000 people have watched already. It's like, what's the point? But the fact of the matter is that there's people that haven't seen it. I feel like I'm kind of plugged into the fly fishing world, and some of these major manufacturers and major, social media outlets put something out, and I miss it for whatever reason. So I might be subscribed, I just might not have watched it. And so I feel like it's important to encourage folks to check out, hey, you might have this guy in your news feed. Go back and make sure you watch it and pay attention. But all that to say, Ben Siddig, the Careless Ethiopian, you might know him with this I'm a Huge Fly Fisherman stickers and social media account, big part of the Flybrary movement that's happening. You're seeing on Instagram if you follow that. But his YouTube channel is fantastic. It is entertaining and educational and just good kind of lunch break fodder. So definitely check out Ben's YouTube channel and subscribe and follow him. Thanks for listening to the Casting Across Fly Fishing Podcast. Please subscribe to your favorite podcast app and rate the podcast in iTunes. Then head over to castingacross.com where you'll find more info on this podcast and 3 posts a week on the people, places, and things that go into the pursuit of fish.